This moment in human history is a moment that you would find in an epic drama where the events are reaching some important climax. We don't want to presume anything about our time, but the reality is a global story is now reaching a new moment. And so, just as in a great epic, you have the moment that we call the denouement, the moment of revelation, where the inner story or the axis of the story becomes revealed. We are, at a very important sense, at that moment. That moment is a moment which brings onto the stage the meaning and purpose of religion. It brings onto the stage the political actors. It brings onto the stage those who are corporate leaders. And in a very new way, it brings humanity onto the stage. We see in religion major paradoxes, major confusions, major questions relating to the nature of truth and the relationship between one truth and another. As science evolves, religion has to adapt its basis of truth in some ways to scientific and consensual reality, or live without that. At the same time, religion must face other religions in a way that has never happened before on the global stage, and examine the relationship between their truths and the world we live in, and the fate of humanity and the future of humanity. The political actors who have emerged in a similar way through religion, as religion has done, through their own channels of nationalism and identity, are also facing a major identity question. Which comes first? Allegiance and responsibility to the earth, to the skies, to the oceans, or to my little part, the skies over my head, the water around my nation, the air that we breathe in this country in relationship to that country. And again, major paradoxes, major dilemmas are revealing themselves, where some nations are consuming and polluting in a way that affects the entire earth. The corporate actors on the human stage have also a major moment in which the fundamental basis of corporate activity should be towards service, providing food and health, and the means for a healthy and happy existence in terms of our basic needs. And yet again, we see that as successful as that has been to now help feed and clothe 4 billion people, the question becomes, is the corporate world, like the religious world and the political world, caught in a major paradox where it is serving itself, where it is now something that creates poverty, that creates pollution, that creates disease, rather than serving humanity. In the center of this picture is humanity itself, dealing with these major forces, and is the most important force, because humanity itself will reconfigure its relationship to the religious, to the political, and to the corporate in a dramatic new way. Human rights movement, of course, had this wonderful benchmark after the Second World War in the declaration of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the universality of human rights. And the story of human rights is always a story of greater inclusion. So those who are not given or perceived as recognized or as having full rights are perceived, are recognized. And so the fundamental basis of the human rights movement is a movement in consciousness that says women and men are fully equal in status and humanness, and that children are fully human and equal in status, and that people of different religions and different sexual orientation and different modalities of being are fully human in orientation. And so as human rights law increases, it increases the inclusion and inclusion because its vision is a universal recognition. And then we have the reality that human rights every day around the world are denied, are violated, that people are not only denied freedom, denied health, exposed to toxics, poisoned, in the pursuit of corporate wealth, but are also denied liberty, are tortured, where governments do not live up to their responsibilities, where governments use militarism to attack people. And so the human rights movement then becomes something like an ambulance or a fire brigade. It is required to respond here, there, everywhere, to draw attention. The human rights movement, as you know, in recent years has been drawing attention to such situations as in the Sudan and Darfur and the extraordinary level of pain and suffering. The human rights movement gets caught in this extremely painful existential reality that torture and murder and mayhem and violations are occurring, and that they must scream louder and louder and try to rattle the cage of government to get the world to respond. And sometimes the world responds more quickly than at other times. The second dilemma in the human rights movement is, given all of these challenges and priorities, the need to understand the greater equation of human rights. So in that universal Declaration of Human Rights, the binding legal covenants that were created in international treaties were the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. And you have certain governments who point the finger at other governments and say, civil liberties, freedom of expression. They point at the civil and political rights violations, but they ignore the economic, social, and cultural rights violations. The use of child labor, the use of very demeaning cultural practices, the whole economic, social, cultural environment. And so the human rights movement has also been trying to mature in its own evolution to say, these are very interrelated, the civil and political and the economic, social and cultural, and to create a broader vision. At the same time, the peace movement, which has had its own deepening journey from simply saying we are against this war and let's get out into the streets and protest various wars, has deepened in its own process to how do we create a culture of peace? What are the roots in culture and the ideas in culture that really begin to create hostility and aggression and the context for war? And equally, the peace movement has seen that the understructure must be looked at in terms of culture and economies. What is the economic impetus that creates violence and war and conflict on the world? What is the relationship between the sale, the profiteering from the sale of military equipment and war? So you have some governments that say, you know, we require peace, but we will sell you any weapons you like. And so again, you know, what we find in both the human rights and the peace movement is a need to go deeper into the understructure and look at root causes. If you look at the distance between Nuremberg and South Africa, you see some extraordinary movement is possible that simply goes beyond law and punishment. So the violators must be punished, brought to justice and punished. And so again, the notion of justice begins to evolve. Where is the justice if you simply apply laws and those responsible are sent to prison, but the society itself doesn't heal? Justice is about, it has failed if it doesn't restore the peace. If it doesn't bring back the healing, then the justice is some sort of moral, righteous notion, but in terms of existential reality and people's lives, the justice has given them nothing. The triumph in South Africa is that notion that truth is essential for justice, that the true story must be told. And you've had a series of truth commissions in the world, from Nunca Más, you know, one of the first in Argentina, that said, never again, let us at least tell the true story of what happened. And El Salvador and Haiti and Guatemala, you know, they played very important roles as truth and inquiry commissions. And now South Africa takes it to another level, truth and forgiveness and reconciliation. And those connections become the basis for a new conceptualization of peace, that peace is possible, but it requires some inner journey, that it isn't simply a legal and systemic equation. It requires a change of heart, a change of consciousness, a return, if you like, of the human, in that notion of the great drama of our times, when we have all of these religious, political, and other actors, and humanity rises. It is the rising of the human capacity to forgive, to reconcile, that is extraordinary. There are so many powerful stories of our capacity as human beings to heal and forgive, and really create the roots of peace again. In Rwanda, I remember hearing a story of a woman whose, in the genocide, neighbor, Hutu and Tutsi neighbor were killing each other. And in this case, this woman's family were murdered. and the young man down the street murdered their family, and in return, this young man, many of his family were murdered. And the Rwandan, the woman in Rwanda said to this young man who had murdered her son, "Now, who do I have? I only have you, and you only have me. So now you come and be my son, and I will be your mother." This capacity is real. It's not a myth. It's not a Hollywood story. It's not that kind of drama. It's the drama that is inherent in the human capacity. And governments of the world and other powerful actors must understand that that capacity cannot be reduced, that humanity will rise in its own evolutionary journey to a higher state of being. I have witnessed the breakdown of civil order in Turkey when I lived there that led to a coup d'etat. I lived in Beirut and was there during the Israeli invasion and the bombings. I was there during the massacre of the Palestinians at the Sabra Shatila camps. For 10 years, I worked in Washington for Amnesty International and studied and lobbied against the cruelty of humanity, against humanity. And yet I am positive about the future. I am hopeful about the future. So how is it possible that if I have witnessed these fires of hell, this extraordinary capacity that human beings have to inflict suffering on other human beings, how is it that I'm hopeful? And really, in my experience in Amnesty International, it was, and also in Beirut, it was seeing that the essence of the human being is not our bodies. So the body can be tortured and killed, but the spirit is undefeatable. The spirit is indomitable. I remember a Palestinian man in the refugee camp after the massacres, standing in the midst of rubble and destruction, inviting me to have coffee in the rubble of his home, where there was just pieces of rock, and he put a little gas stove and made Arabic coffee and poured this coffee with no hatred, with only the story in his body that the dignity that he could give and demonstrate was his true nature. And I saw in this human being the spirit of humanity. And I saw it in so many places in those years in Amnesty International, human beings on the torture slab whose spirit was so vivid and so clear. And then I have seen former Nazis and Holocaust survivors reconcile with each other, offer each other forgiveness, move through this pain and destruction because they are able to tap into that deeper story, that deeper wisdom in the human spirit. You may remember this extraordinary human being called Giordano Bruno, who tragically didn't get to live out his vision or even have it resonate in the power centers of the world the way it should. But one of Giordano Bruno's thoughts is now, I believe, part of the emerging science of human consciousness. And Giordano Bruno said, it is an omnicentric universe. It is the center is everywhere. You don't live on the periphery and I live in the center. This, culture over here isn't on the edge and this culture here in the center. No. That is not an accurate description of the structure of the universe. The structure of the universe is omnicentric. The center is everywhere. God is a circle whose center is everywhere, whose circumference can never be found. I see in the story of human evolution the most glorious moment when human beings begin to recognize the divine, the sacred, the mystery, that as they look into each human being, they see the center. They see that God didn't create peripheries, that we aren't simply functional means for other beings to become glorious and famous and whatever. As we look deep into matter, in the subatomic world of matter, it is all connected. That thought vibrates and ripples through the whole. That the substructure of the universe is completely connected, not separate. There is no separation. The separation is a beautiful illusion which we enjoy. We enjoy that. We enjoy that moment of separateness. But if we fall into the illusion of the separateness, that's where the problem begins. And so I see in the future that science and spirituality coming together, and that even the technology itself is only a reflection. So it starts, for me, in some story of reconciling in my own journey, that if I think of human rights abuse, I think of stories that are about who's to blame here? Who can we find at fault? Who is the lesser human being? It's the one with the funny nose, right? It's the one with the fat lips. It's the one with the different color. Who can we blame and who can we scapegoat and who can we target? And there is no lesser human being. Powerful philosophical idea, but it's an existential one, that we as human beings are that vehicle that can transform hatred to love, that we are transformational engines in this realm of the qualities,